Welcome back to another episode of the Sky Society podcast. Today, I am so excited to be talking to Eleni DuBois. She is the Senior Director of Events at Morning Brew. Welcome, Eleni.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Eleni has over 16 years of experience working in media. So we have a ton to talk about, and she just has some incredible advice. I'm excited to be able to dig into your brain and learn all about your experience within events. But before we jump into all of that fun stuff, can you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me on again. Really excited to chat with you. So I'm Eleni, who I am and what I am. I guess right now, first and foremost, I'm a mom. I feel like that's the way I
Amazing.
define myself, first and foremost. But I guess on top of that, I'm a career woman, a marketer, and an events operator. I feel like that's the best way to describe where I currently am in my career trajectory. So I have been, gosh, working in media. I mean, 16 years post college, but I actually interned in broadcast journalism for CBS in college. So it's like I'm hitting close to 20, which is so hard to believe because I'm just so youthful. But yeah, I fell into events very randomly right after college. I went to GW and 2008 was like a really, really rough year to get jobs. And we were in like basically a recession. And I remember, 2008, I found a job posting for my first job on Craigslist.
Oh my gosh, Craigslist.
Yep, yep. And it was to be an events coordinator slash associate editor for Washingtonian Magazine, which is a DC lifestyles magazine, right? And they were launching a bridal publication and they were getting back into doing events. And I applied and heard back, and I did an interview with two women. One was the director of marketing, and one was the editor in chief of this new bridal magazine. And I remember thinking, wow, like I want to be them when I grow up. Like they were just super badass, wonderful people, really smart. And they hired me. And it was like one of the best jobs I've ever had. It was awesome. And I didn't know that much about events, right? Like I like to gather people. I loved community. I obviously read a lot of journalism, media. I mean, this is 2008, so we didn't really have social media the way that it is now, right? Like Facebook was out there, but we got our news from reading magazines and newspapers and some digital interfaces. So I worked there for 5 years, and then I kind of ran the gamut of working at a lot of other media companies in Washington, D.C. So I've worked at large and small media companies here, which has been really, really, really exciting. Some legacy brands and then some new media like where I am now. And then about 3 years ago, when I had gotten laid off from the Atlantic, which I had worked at for 5 years, I ended up at Morning Brew. And they were looking to, I guess they were really looking to monetize outside the inbox because they had a few products, mostly newsletters, and they wanted to dabble into events. And I applied when I was, freelancing and kind of not in a steady job because I had just gotten laid off. And gosh, like hiring an events person during a pandemic, like crazy. But I got the job. I think 700 people applied, and they picked me. And it was, always tell people this story, like Morning Brew's a startup. I had been at a bunch of legacy media brands. Like things kind of happen for a reason. Like I don't think I would have ever worked for really a startup. I maybe would have thought it was a little bit too risky, like fun, but risky. But I saw the opening and I interviewed with these amazing people. And at the time, a really great boss. So I was like, I'm gonna just try this out. Like, why not? Why not take the risk? And the other thing too is, I had I know us marketers and people in general can get a little title obsessed. I had been like a director of marketing, a director of events for many years and had teams. And the role that I had applied to at Morning Brew was an event manager. And a lot of us who had sort of started out at the company, I think I was maybe employee number 70 or 75, like we just applied to whatever manager role, like looked good. And then I became a director, but it was a cool job and it was an opportunity to build, and the title didn't matter, right? Like this was the first time I had really applied to a job where I was like, this is what I want to be doing. You can call me whatever you want. And I got it. And I've been here for 3 years doing really fun stuff.
That's amazing. I definitely want to dive into what you're doing at Morning Brew right now, especially since I subscribe to their newsletter, but I didn't know they did events. So also
Oh,
very interested to hear about that.
yeah.
I've been so busy. I haven't been an avid reader as much as I used to be anymore.
Uh,
But I also want to go back to that point that you touched on of you've worked at huge media companies before, like you said, The Atlantic, Washington Magazine, you were back at CBS. So like you run the gambit there and then
sure.
going not only into a startup, which is obviously a very different environment, but also taking a lower title than you had before. So what do you think kind of, because I know a lot of people really do care about the title. That is the
Yeah.
only thing that matters to them.
Mhm.
And so kind of where was your mindset or what kind of told you like, hey, this is the right opportunity for me, even though
Yeah.
it's something that I haven't done before and it's going to be a totally different title?
Great question. So, point of clarification, I think it was an event manager title, and I negotiated director. I think I negotiated director. So I ended up at a director.
Okay,
All the,
well,
yep, go
also
ahead.
I want to touch on that because that is a really smart move that you did there as well.
Well, yeah. So basically, Um, it was an event manager role, and it was a big role, and they were looking for, I think, a unicorn, and I happened to fit the bill. And also, I looked at the whole sort of package, and I said, look, I've been bringing this many years of experience, and I've been sitting at a director level. Like, I want to make sure that I'm, bringing. I know that I bring value and experience to this role at this level. Is this something that you'd consider? And they were open to considering it. So I think that I'm not saying, apply to any job and you're going to end up with the title you want, because it's not always going to happen. But I did feel like I had the opportunity in our conversations when I was discussing what I wanted to bring and also build, right? That I felt like I could continue with this director level title that I had. And always shoot your shot, but do it within reason. And I would never, I would say to other marketers, obviously understand and bring forward your value, but also be able to back that up. So I was able to back up the fact that, hey, I've been in a director seat for 5 years, and these are the budgets I manage, this is the value, this is the many teammates that I bring to the role. Would you consider this, knowing that you want that? So that's how I did that.
That is incredibly smart. And I think, especially at startups, I find that they're more flexible when it comes to titles than maybe some others. But I love that idea of you saw an opportunity or you read the job description, you were like, this fits me really great. It's just not at the title where I want to be. And you came and backed it up with all of your years of experience. And I think that also kind of leans into why you're a good fit for the role because you also understand the scope and you're kind of showing them your expertise. Amazing. I love that you did that.
Cool.
So tell me a little bit about kind of what your role entails here
Yeah.
at Morning Brew.
Yeah, sure. So, I know you're a fan of the Brew. I'm sad that you haven't heard of our events before, but many, many have. So our events we do, oh gosh, something like 55 plus events a year. And
What?
yeah, yeah. So I would say the bread and butter of our business are these virtual events. We do about 5 a month, and they are mostly for our professional brands. So everyone obviously knows the Morning Brew Daily and our social outlets. But then we have 7 professional brands that are running the gamut from CFO to healthcare to marketing, you name it. And we do events for all of them. So our events are actually B2B marketing events for our professional brand mostly. We're doing events we have an event coming up in 2 weeks, and it's on AI and marketing. We're doing a CFO Brew live event. So we're really, really excited about that. In terms of kind of where I started. So I started in 2021 during a pandemic. So we were doing nothing live. It was all virtual. And Morning Brew really hadn't teased that out before. And I was just a one person. So that's the other thing. Like, everyone thinks maybe coming to startups that they can negotiate all these things and get all these things. Like, you have to do all of the jobs and all of the work, right?
It's
So
so hard.
I was a one woman show. And when I was at the Atlantic, we were a 55-person events team. Um, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But what I always say, really, and I committed to wanting to build and learn in this role, but I think the best part of being a one-person show is that you have to do every single job, right? And
Hmm.
then when you get the great fortune of hiring people and building out your team, you have that perspective, right? So if I hire someone to be an event coordinator and they mostly work on um, the logistics and operation of getting our attendees to events and working with the streaming platform and the registration site, and the streaming platform goes down, I completely can empathize there because I had to do that by myself. And I don't know if a lot of leaders um, remember or have that humbling experience to be like, hey, when you have to build something from the ground up, you literally have to do every task. You have to just really like the things that I did when I first started at Washingtonian Magazine as an event coordinator, sending out invites, tracking RSVPs. Like I had to do that, but I also had to present to our publisher what our strategy was and how we were going to save and make money. So kind of have to wear a whole lot of hats. It's humbling, but it's also just such an amazing learning exercise that like it really is like being able to build something from the ground up and then iterate and revise and fail and succeed and fail is just really fun.
And I'm sure since, as you said, since you did everything first, now as you're starting to build a team, then you also have a very clear vision because you held that role that that person is now coming in and taking.
Exactly. I mean, you of course I have a clear vision, but the other thing about building a team is that I hire people that have skills that I don't.
Mm.
I think that's really, really important. And while I have done all the roles of my team, let me tell you, they do a billion times better. They, I like what's the fun in hiring just like myself over and over again? Like when I get the great fortune of building out a team, like I can think of everyone specifically and all the characteristics and traits that they focus on that like is not my skill set or not my expertise or it's amazing because then we balance each other out.
Yeah. I definitely want to dive a little bit more into your leadership experience in a bit if we have some time, because I think you have a lot of incredible insight there as well.
Mhm.
But I quickly first want to go back to this role with Morning Brew. You're doing these B2B virtual events. So specifically, I would love to talk about virtual events. So
Sure, sure.
can you tell me kind of your, I mean, I'm sure throughout your career you've done both in person and virtual. So doing the virtual events, what are some of the challenges that you find in this space? Because I think the pandemic really, really sparked like this massive trend of now virtual events are so much more popular and people are so much more open to them, which I love. Sky
Yep.
Society, we do a ton of virtual
Yeah,
events.
yeah.
But yeah, if you could kind of speak to kind of the challenges of what you've learned having to build out of these virtual events.
Yeah, totally. And I should have added this earlier. So we are doing 5 virtual events a month, and then we're doing 7 what we call morning events or half day IRL events, and then we do one big summit. So we kind of run the
Wow.
game there. Yeah, yeah. And then we'll do, we do cocktail receptions, we do it all. In terms of virtual events, I would say that there can be a lot of challenges with virtual events. I found that you have to figure out for your business and organization and brand what your sweet spot is. So for us, these are B2B virtual events that are presumably helping our attendees do their jobs better and make better decisions. And so these have to be quick hit, really meaningful conversations. And what we've actually learned is that in order to capture our audience's attention, we have to ensure that the storytellers that we're booking actually have like tangible advice that they are giving
Mhm.
to all of our attendees after the 30-minute conversation. Because then what's the point, right? Like, I don't think virtual events are going to go anywhere. I love that we do them because we can engage with so vast of an audience, which is amazing. But we have to make sure that we never are flat when it comes to our speakers. We want compelling storytellers, people that are really going to engage our attendees. But also, we found our sweet spot, which is our attendees really want to get some nuggets of gold out of these conversations. They don't want to just play it in the backdrop while they're making lunch in between
Mhm.
meetings.
Okay. So finding speakers that are going to deliver a lot of value to your audience, like whichever niche that you find is really fit for your business. I'm so for Skyset, as I said, it's been really fun. We have our niche, which is women in marketing, and building the community that way. So is your main kind of objective here with events community building, or kind of how do you see events really supporting businesses in the future?
Great question. I would definitely say community building is a really, really big part of it. I mean, Morning Brew, like that's our ethos. It's our bread and butter is to build community. All of our virtual events and our in-person events have networking. So virtually we have a chat, and I love obviously listening to all of our conversations, but I love just becoming like a virtual event attendee and just watching the chat and people engage with each other, and they're commenting about the speaker and they're sharing thoughts and ideas, they're throwing their LinkedIn out there. I love that. And then for actually our first IRL event, we are doing almost 2 hours of networking for a half day event, which
Oh, wow.
obviously we have incredible speakers, incredible content, but we surveyed our audience multiple times for all the different professional brands. And we were listening to what they were saying. And they were like, yeah, we really love great content, but also we want to network. Um, so I think the community piece of it is really, really important, is to just make sure that like you understand what your audience wants, right? And you give them that.
Very, very interesting. And I, like you said, I think that we're going to see more and more companies build out their virtual communities as well. Because I think the pandemic really kind of accelerated this transition to being able to do both. Not to mention what will be possible when we have AI get more advanced in the future, which is also exciting to think about.
Mind blowing.
So, looking back through your career, you've worked, I mean, this role alone was a massive undertaking for you to build out this events team. And like going back at your other roles, you've worked in a very high stress, very difficult field. So, can you speak to some of the challenges, some of the benefits, the payoffs, but also kind of the stressors as well of working in such a high stress career?
Yeah, and it's funny, like I can sit here and reflect back because I have had all this experience. It's like I can actually like pinpoint where I was in my career and how I was reacting to the things that I was, because I didn't really have the perspective. And also like layer on top the fact that, I've lived about 100 lives this morning just based on the. So, in terms of navigating high stress in the events profession, so events are chaos. They're chaotic. They are chaotic. Doesn't matter how organized you are, events are extremely chaotic. And I think it's important to, as a leader and also as a team, to have grace under pressure, right? I think that's really, really important. Now, I will say we all have to give ourselves some grace, because if you're starting out in events, you have no perspective. Like the 22-year-old version of myself is very different from the 37.725, however old I am, version of myself, right? Like I have perspective now, right? It's very, very different. And so looking kind of back, how I wish I had handled myself a little bit better then, like I do now, is I really focus on taking care of myself in the chaos. Okay. Um, and I think what that looks like for me, which may be different for other people, are like the outlets that I have outside of work, which is family, exercise, sleep, and eating well, and drinking a lot of water. I think it's really, really, really important to try and integrate that into your life and into your routine, because work is very all consuming, and events are too. You've got early mornings, you've got late nights, sometimes you work weekends. Like it's very, very hard. And so you have to really take care of yourself in that piece. High stress, events aren't for everyone. They're very, 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 very stressful. And I realize that besides taking care of myself and trying to keep this grace under pressure is realizing that mistakes are going to happen all the time. Like, I kind of laugh a little bit when I ask people. I laugh when I get this or have asked this in interviews of other people, like, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made? Like a billion mistakes, right? Because it's events, right? Like you have no control over the fact that my Wi-Fi just went out, right? No, but what did you do? You handled yourself really gracefully. You're like, oh, anyway, you just went out. I'm going to resume recording and let you know when it's okay, right? Like that is grace under pressure. You handle the stress, right? So I think that's really, really important. And it doesn't happen overnight, right? You got to fumble experience a little bit more to have that perspective. Also just events aren't for everyone. They're super stressful. I love the organized chaos. And I walk into a lot of event situations knowing that mistakes will happen and arise and that some things aren't in my control. But what's in my control is to just be really prepared and try and anticipate kind of the worst.
Yeah.
That tends to do the trick.
Feel like you're giving a cautionary warning. Events are stressful. Be warned. um,
They don't have to be. It depends on the events that you do. And like, it's high stress. Like,
yeah.
like it's not rocket science. They like list like these high stress jobs and events are on there. And
But it
I
is
also,
because there's so many components and they're all time bound, right? Everything has to fit together perfectly for one time. And I think that's what makes it so stressful.
yeah, but if you plan ahead and you're super organized and you have a team that communicates, like they can also be very smooth and beautiful. And so, yeah, they're stressful. And I don't, like I don't even think of them as a stressful thing anymore because maybe I'm jaded and I've just been in it for so, so long. But I do feel like if you love doing events, weather the course. Like it gets easier. Your perspective gets better. Like they're beautiful things. Like I still love them. I've been doing them for a really long time. Maybe when I, grow up one day, I'll do something different, but I like it. And I'm not saying I like it because they're stressful. I like it because they're interesting and this opportunity to bring people together.
Yeah.
Uh, but it certainly can be high stress. I mean, we're not curing cancer here.
I have to share since this just happened yesterday and we're talking about mistakes and high stress.
Yeah.
We had an event. So we're recording this at around Valentine's. We had a Valentine's Day event
Cool.
and we do all our events through Eventbrite. And normally Eventbrite has an integration with Zoom. And so no one gets the Zoom link until you start the event. Our integration was not working. And so for this one event, I just manually included the Zoom link because whatever the integration was working, I was like, okay, I'll just manually include it. The Zoom link ended up on I'm assuming some Reddit page, some trolls, whatever. And I start this event. It's Galentine's Girls Night In. I have all these girls joining, and all of these guys come in trolling the event, coming on, putting like playing music, sharing their screen, like completely taking it over. I'm hosting. I'm like freaking out because I'm trying to like host events. It's most people's first interaction with Sky Society. Our event is how a lot of people enter our community. And I mean, ended up removing them and the event went on, but it was the most just craziest thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah. And like, I mean, that's crazy. That's totally you have to, when these things happen, like in the moment, you dealt with it, right? You dealt with it. Um, but like also in those moments, self-reflect a little bit. Like, were you just moving a little bit too fast? Maybe, maybe, maybe if you had just like chilled out a little bit, got your ducks in a row, then maybe the link would have gone somewhere else, right? But you handled it. Like mistakes happen. How do you deal with them in the moment? Maybe there'll be a little banter about it the days to follow, but you'll make up for it. Like your brand is so strong, you'll make up for it after the fact. And, you know, we, I have done too many events and been with our team for so long that stuff happens and try to have a sense of humor after the fact if you can.
Yes.
Like I'll,
After the fact, in the moment, I'm like, damn it.
in the moment, you're like, how did this happen? And, you know, I'm sorry about that. It's not fun.
No, you're good, but the speaking to your point of you just have to be able to move on your feet. because everyone was like, oh, did you just like cancel the event? I was like, no, I just like took a couple of minutes, removed all of them. I told everyone to turn their video on. It's like everyone's video's off. I'm removing from the meeting. And then we kept going. And it wasn't perfect, but I think, but like basically kind of like what you said, you just kind of have to keep going and just be okay that it was not perfect and it did not go the way that you thought it would.
Yeah, I read this thing, I forget where I saw it, probably on LinkedIn or something, but it was like you can't fake events, right? So like you're there, you're in it. You gotta be nimble and be on your toes and just figure out the best solution. And again, like I think that's the fun, crazy fun part about events is like
Yeah.
it's a little puzzle you gotta figure out.
So one thing you had mentioned to me is that you are a master of organization and kind of hearing you speak, I can see that you're very organized. So can you tell me some advice when it comes to putting together events, like
Yeah.
your biggest tips for other event marketers or other aspiring event marketers to just be really organized when it comes to planning an event and avoiding a mistake like I had made?
Yeah. So I will say write down everything. I'm old school and like a notebook, but I always have just backup type notes. So normally when I'm in meetings with high stakeholders, I'll tell them like I'm not paying attention to you. I'm just taking down notes so I fully understand everything. That's how I comprehend information. So in terms of just being organized and detail oriented, you have to just be a really good listener too, so you understand what everyone else's objectives are when you're planning an event and also your own. And then we use Google Suite at Morning Brew, and I just generally love an Excel or a Google Doc, or a Google presentation to stay super duper organized. I couldn't be anywhere without those tools. And then I have an incredible team. We all have different roles in our team. They're all incredibly organized as well. I would say communication and just very detailed tracking in docs is really, really important. Because I have a very lean team and we all have different roles, we communicate often via Slack and also in in-person meetings, which I think is important. But also in our documents, we're super detail oriented because if someone needs to come in and take a look at it. So for example, if my programmer is building out an event and she lists all of her speakers and I'm running into a meeting with an executive and I need to give a status update on how bookings are going, she is so detail oriented that I can look into one of her docs and see, hey, I reach out to this person on this date and this is where it transpired. So I would say it's really important to just stay really organized, and the documentation of everything is great. Now, we're not like documenting every second of everyone's lives, and not everyone's going to, update the document every 2 hours, but I think it's just really important as a leader to try to be as organized as you possibly can, be very, very clear in your objectives, and then ask your team too to just keep a organized track of how things are going so that you can stay on top of things and they can too.
Okay. Yeah, I am imagining too when you're working and delegating those tasks, like you have your team working, that having those docs where everybody's information is that way, okay, maybe I haven't, like you said, looked at the bookings in a while, but I know that, my team or whoever's in charge of that, she's got it and it's all organized and all shared in the docs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, if, a lot of events people, especially these days, are kind of running and operating on their own. And we're all virtual for the most part. I mean, obviously we're together when we do our live events and a lot of us go into the office, but I think it's really important to, like, outside of the organization, the documentation, to do like a weekly stand up with your team and have an agenda and go and have people contribute to the agenda and have someone lead that conversation. That way we are all, I like to do them on Monday so that we can look ahead for the week. That way we're all in lock sync about what the priorities are for that week. And then I also, something that from my old career job, but I have everyone do like a weekly, just an email update to everyone. That's like, hey, here are the bookings that we did. Hey, here's what's going on with sponsors. Hey, here, how are we doing with RSVPs? That way we have it handy and we just know that information.
Yeah. I love Monday.com. We use that as well for our
Yeah.
project management. It's the best. They also have a really good, if you're a really small team, you can do like we have the free account and it's great because if you're like a more leaner team, you don't need to kind of pay for the full version.
Awesome.
Okay, so we've gone through kind of your current role, planning events. Now I would also love to talk a little bit about some or talk to aspiring marketers or someone who would maybe like to have a role like yours. So you've been
Uh,
on both sides of the interviews. You've been interviewed, you've been
yeah.
interviewing.
Yeah.
So, can you share a little bit about how to best position yourself for high level interviews
Yeah.
and be able to kind of stand out and land a role?
For sure. I think the most important thing in an interview is to do your research and err on the side of, hey, I'm going to walk into an interview and they're going to just ask me a lot of interview questions and also ask me to reflect about their business. Because actually, you get into an interview and depending on who you meet with, like sometimes my interviews can be a little bit more conversational versus tell me your strengths and weaknesses. Like I can start out like half of my interviews being a little bit more conversational and get the information that I need, but I will say that you will find success in super duper preparing and researching that organization, right? So if someone is been selected to, obviously they're standing out because their resume is really awesome or their cover letter is really awesome or it was like a referral, like, they've already stood out in my mind. But if they get to an interview and they don't really know about our events or know what we do, then that can be a little bit of a challenge for me because it's all available online.
Mhm. Yes, I always the best questions to ask are never questions you can just Google the answer to. That is your responsibility to come into the interview already knowing that.
Exactly. And like, if you walk into an interview, I mean, it's obviously like important to feel really confident. In my old interview days, I mean, obviously it's been a while because I've been at Morning Brew, but I used to do this like Superwoman pose. So the Superwoman pose is like a mindset where like right before I would get into an interview or even do this before like a big meeting or a big presentation. I don't know who I learned it from, an old colleague or something, but Superwoman, like you
I
gotta
love
like
I always give that advice. I love that. I used to do the same thing.
yeah, like the Superwoman pose, you're like, I'm looking at myself in the mirror, like, gosh, I feel tired, but I'm like, okay, I got this. I feel, and it just like makes you just feel prepared. So definitely do your Superwoman or Superman or whatever is pose to get you there mentally. Listen to all the music, but yeah, do your research, do your homework. Everything's on LinkedIn. You don't need to get super creepy like, oh, I saw that like you liked Pat's on your open Instagram account. Like don't go there. Okay. I would say don't go there. But it's nice when people walk into things prepared, and I would say usually like what the first interview questions like tell me about yourself, work on your elevator pitch, like that's super duper important, right? The big like first impressions are really strong, so come up with whatever your elevator pitch is. Don't be too long-winded, and try to mock the flow of how your interviewer is, right? If they're super formal, like smile, like show your personality, but don't go from, 0 to 100 on getting super comfortable. But yeah, it's really hard to interview and you're never going to master it unless you're doing interviews all the time. And no one does interviews all the time, is the hope not to. But yeah, be yourself, do your research. Yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway.
Yeah. I think the research piece is so important. And I think sometimes people will say, well, I know what the company does, like, isn't that enough? But I always advise, like, go to their about page, see what their values are, really understand what their product is. Because I think a lot of times people don't actually understand what their product is when they're interviewing, especially if it's something a little bit more complex. You want to
Yeah,
make sure you understand what their product does at like a base level. And then if you're interviewing in marketing, like go to their socials. If you're interviewing for Morning View, you better subscribe and be reading and not be like me and say, I didn't know you guys did events. You better know all of that information.
yeah, exactly. Like take take the excuse me, the prep time to just prepare. And yeah, that's spot on. There was something else I was gonna say, but it totally just blanked my mind. Oh yeah, the other thing I will say is it's really important to ask questions in interviews. Really, really important to ask questions. And I tend to you know, I haven't again done this in a while, but like I always, when I was interviewing, would bring a notebook and a pen so that I could take notes on things that they said. Because yes, you can do all the research by looking on their LinkedIn, their social, their website, reading their newsletter, whatever the product is. But you're interviewing with someone and they're going to bring up things like, hey, I'm really going to be focusing on these initiatives. Like, take a note of that and then ask
Oh,
questions. I feel like it's good to ask a couple of questions at the
yeah.
end of the interview. I wouldn't say I wouldn't like advance someone because they didn't ask questions, but you don't know exactly what I'm doing. Like if you only subscribe to the daily, you may not know that we do a ton of marketing events, right? So it's a learning process too. So I would just say like certainly ask questions, right? Even if it's like, hey leader, what are your top priorities? Hey, what's it like working there? Talk to me about their work-life balance. Talk to me about their culture. It's just, I think it's important to ask questions and perhaps tailor them based on who you're talking to. So we typically do multiple rounds at Morning Brew, and other companies I know now are like, you kind of have multiple rounds of meeting with people. So the first might be the hiring manager, where you're going to ask like core questions about the job that you would be doing. Maybe the next round would be with a colleague. Like ask them what it's like to work with said person. Ask them what work-life balance looks like, what the culture looks like, how do they communicate? Like tailor your questions to the person that you're chatting with. And then if the final round is an executive, like best believe you're going to ask them about their goals and what they have planned for the upcoming year and what their learnings were from the year prior. So those are my little tips.
I love that. I think I would argue that you better always ask questions, that not asking questions is you're just doing yourself a huge disservice. Because I
Yeah.
also think they're a good way for you to connect with the interviewer, like those personal ones, like what's your favorite part about working at the company, or what's the company culture like, or those types of things are also good ways for you to make that connection. I'm curious because I've heard some controversy about one question I'd love to get your take on, is the advice that after an interview or kind of at the end, one of your questions should be something along the lines of, do you have any hesitations about me for this role?
Oh, and what's your question specifically? Do I
What
ask?
if you being and someone that is you're the interviewer and a candidate asks you that question, like, do you have any hesitations for me about this role? Would you be like, is that a positive for a candidate to ask to be able to kind of maybe get insight about how they could, or that way they could kind of give almost like their rebuttal right there, or be more aware of how they can be a better candidate, or maybe you're just suggest, because I've heard that advice of like, oh, you should ask that in interviews, but it's kind of controversial. Some people say yes, you should ask it. Some people say no, you should not ask it.
Yeah, so great question. I would say like if you want to ask that question because you like want that answer and want that feedback, ask it, right? Like nothing is stopping said person from asking that question. I definitely have been asked that question before, and um you know, it's definitely it can put the interviewer on spot, but it's important for me to figure out how to ask further questions about said thing that I think they have the gap. So like if they're like, yeah, are there any hesitations? I'm like, well, one thing I'm thinking about as I review your candidacy is what you did here. We're trying to bring you there and figuring out how you can make that gap. Like, I don't think it's a bad question to ask at all. You have to be very prepared to get very honest feedback. I don't think everyone's going to be as mindful of, being sweet in their delivery, but it's good to be transparent in the interview process for sure. I'm trying to think if I've ever asked that. I mean, I feel like I must have asked that at some point in my career during interviews, especially as you get to the final rounds and you're trying to figure out like how to distinguish yourself and ensure that um, you're going to make it to that next level. But I think it's a totally fair question to ask. Just be prepared for the response, right? Like someone
Yeah.
may just give you like kind of a answer, like, no, you're great, and then you never hear from them. Um, but if in your heart of hearts, and I think like that's the other thing. I wouldn't just ask it to ask it and make waves. Like I think if you're in an interview and you're talking to somebody and maybe it's not a good vibe and then you act like it's a feeling, right? Like I think you would know based on the person asking you questions that maybe you can't answer, or maybe there's a little bit of a struggle for you. I think but why not? Like it's these interviews are two-way streets, and we're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing us. So
I agree.
controversial, sure, go ahead, ask if your heart wants that.
Okay, yeah. But I think your piece there, be prepared to hear something that you maybe don't want to hear. Or maybe
I mean,
that,
I would hope no one's like, I would never do that. Like, I would never, everyone's so professional and, but if you're gonna ask someone like, hey, like, are there any issues with my resume or like be prepared to get said boss's feedback on that.
hmm. Another quicker question, because I know you mentioned that most of your team is virtual, so I'm assuming a lot of the interviews you're doing are remote. Are there any big mistakes you see people or candidates make when they come on to a virtual Zoom or whatever you guys do, virtual interview? Like maybe like really you can't see them, or maybe there are any type of mistakes you see made on the virtual side?
That's a great question. I mean, here's the thing, like you have to understand this virtual stuff. This isn't real life. Like this is virtual. So give people some grace. Like if their Wi-Fi dropped out or mine did, like that's okay. Like obviously test your Wi-Fi. And I remember when I was interviewing for Morning Brew, it was so wild because it was in a pandemic. I had small children. I had a small child. And I was very stressed. I was very stressed about navigating an interview in a pandemic, with no childcare. So I went to my parents' house and they were helping me with my kid while I was interviewing. And I just remember like hearing him cry while I was interviewing with a bunch of people. Like it is stressful. You don't know what people are going through when they are interviewing virtually. So like give everyone grace. But I'll never forget this. I was interviewing with their head of HR and I had prior to obviously checked, maybe the day before I had checked the Wi-Fi. I had checked my setup. My computer was great. The next morning when I was supposed to interview with her, maybe it was like at 11 that morning, I spilled coffee all over my menu.
Oh,
Yep.
no.
Yep. And I had to use an iPad. And then kind of similar to the sliding here, I had tested out the frame on the iPad. It was perfect, like, great interview shot, right? And all of a sudden the sun just decided to come out. And so as I get into this interview with her, like she could only see part of me. And I just like I was crumbling on the inside because A, I had just destroyed my computer. I really wanted this job and I was unemployed. I had a 11-month-old who was crying upstairs that my sweet parents were taking care of. Like I had a lot on my shoulders and she gave me so much grace and we had such a great conversation. So sure, I could nitpick to the cows come home, like super vain things that happen in interviews, but I don't because this isn't real life. Like this isn't fair. There's enough stresses in life. Like again, if you research and come prepared and have a great conversation, none of that stuff matters.
Yeah. I think that's an hilarious story to start with, or a stressful story. I can imagine, like, I think I would also look like all the things, like you said, you had been laid off, you had a baby upstairs, like everything's just going wrong. But like you said, it's the conversation that matters. The other stuff isn't real. Sometimes after the like a long day of me doing meetings all day, I think to the fact that I've been talking to a screen like the entire day and that there's not actually a human in front of me. It's kind of wild when you think about it.
It's so wild. Wait, the other thing that had happened before that interview, I remember I was like, I wanted to like, feel and look myself and I had like maybe curled my hair or something and instead of spraying hairspray I sprayed disinfectant spray. Like grabbed the spray and I went this. Yeah, so like what could go wrong went wrong and again like this is I mean this is the new normal but yeah give some people some grace. Interviews are stressful enough and so yeah.
And if you're on the other side, just know that you will likely be, I think people are more understanding now that we've kind of been through this for a while, that there's just so much stuff you can't control.
There's so much stuff you can't control, but hopefully, you're prepared and you have a great conversation. You do
Yeah.
your best. And if it doesn't work out, you find something even better.
Well, Eleni, we've covered so much. This has been so much fun chatting about all these different areas throughout your career. My
Yeah.
last question for you today is, do you have any other advice you'd like to share with marketers who would love to have a job like yours someday?
Yeah, no, well, thank you so, so much. It's been such a treat chatting with you, and I hope we can continue the conversation. I hope there's some nuggets of gold here. I mean, in terms of advice, just, be passionate, right? And look at all these new like, there's so much opportunity out there. So, so much opportunity. When I got laid off, I remember I thought I like my life was just I was just so disappointed because I was like, I'm gonna be in this job forever, and it's the perfect job. And then I got to Morning Brew and I realized that perhaps a perfect job doesn't exist, a perfect life does, right? And so if you're able to build that and then have a job that you can go to every day that you're really excited about, and you work with awesome people and you have a manager that you vibe with, like that's gold, right? That's gold.
Yeah.
There's no perfect job. I mean, sure, maybe there is. I don't know what that is. But they're hard days, they're easy days, there's challenging days. Just love what you do. I think that's really great. It's just like be excited, love what you do. I love getting up and going to work. Like that's my thing. I love it. I love getting up. I love going to work. I love working for an organization that I care about. Some people like working on their own and being their own boss and like figure out what your thing is too. Like don't try to just position yourself just because like all your friends are doing it or it seems like what is expected of you. Like figure out what your thing is and what you're passionate about, and then the rest will come. That's my
That's
advice.
that's beautiful. I love it. A perfect ending to a perfect episode. Thank you so much, Eleni. I absolutely appreciate your time and your wisdom
I,
today. This was so much fun.
it was great meeting you, Natalie, and good luck. Hopefully, no more Galentine's Day fiascos. I'll just like remember I said, event mistakes don't happen, even though they happen all the time. But it was great chatting with you. Thanks, Natalie. I'll talk to you later.